Tempelhof is known around the world. It stands for Berlin's freedom and the successful end of the Cold War and a new peace. Tempelhof Airport is of major significance for Berlin, and we at the Allied Museum want to be here because the Allied Museum and this place simply belong together. The airport itself was built by the Nazis in monumental style, but if you look inside, you see a modern industrial building. They call Tempelhof the mother of all airports. Despite the monumentalism, there is a lot of modernity. As a historian, when I walk down the stairs from the gates to the airfield, images of the Berlin airlift come to mind. It must have been very noisy. A plane landed here every few seconds and they were being loaded and unloaded. So much activity. Some Berliners say that the noise of bombers was suddenly replaced by the noise of freedom. Here, former enemies became friends. The Allied Museum is about the message of freedom. It's also about the bonds with our partners, with the US, with France, with Britain. Our history is closely linked to Europe, to NATO, to the system of alliances. Democracy and indeed prosperity could only develop because we work together. It's important these days to make that clear. It's not nationalism, but rather internationalism. We want to build a museum here under the banner of freedom. We have a culture of remembering that rightly focuses on the history of the Nazis and the East German dictatorship, and there are plenty of places that do that. But the West Berlin era, and Berlin as the locus of the Cold War, those are not represented in Berlin. That's what we aim to do here. This is Hangar 7, the object of our desire. This is where we want to put the museum. When you enter it, the first impression is wow. It's huge, it's big, it's open. It's perfect for our museum because that's what it's about, the values of freedom, but also a space that's open to experimentation, to debate. It's also about how the Berlin Wall, or the Cold War, were finally overcome. It's an auspicious story that deserves to be celebrated, that can also be debated. There can be multiple perspectives of the story. There are people in this city who lived various lives, people who experienced war. A space this open makes addressing and discussing that very possible. What will be special about this museum is that we will provide much greater context for Cold War history. Until now, we've focused on the Allied presence in Berlin, their relationship to the city's population. But the bigger picture, the conflict between the Soviet Union and the US, the superpowers, is not covered. So what was that highly charged historical context within which the Allied troops were operating in West Berlin? For example, the nuclear threat, so symbolic and so key for that era. So many peace marches and demonstrations were linked to what it meant to live under Cold War conditions and the nuclear threat. The aim is to make that clear here, in this place. The reorientation of the museum and its move to this prominent locale is especially important right now. War is raging in Europe. It's about democracy versus dictatorship, freedom or the lack of it. And if you look back at the Cold War era, you see what it was about. It was about different ways of life, different systems. There are giant parallels from which we can learn and see a lot. This venue has a large number of advantages over Clayallee, where we're currently located. It moves us to the center of the action, the center of Berlin. That means our message has greater power here. We can attract 5 times the number of visitors. We know exactly what we want from this base. We want to take off at this airport. All we need is clearance, and then we can head for the runway.